Altogether Ooky is brought to you by Thomas the Tank Engine meets Anna Karenina, in theaters now. You are watching Altogether Ooky, produced in the SATV Studio in Salem, Massachusetts. I am Clovis Black, your host. Oh, I was just remembering today's family circus. It was really funny. Silence, a Fable, by Edgar Allan Poe. Read by Clovis Black. Listen to me, said the demon as he placed his hand upon my head. There is a spot upon this accursed earth which thou hast never yet beheld, and if by any chance thou hast beheld it, it must have been in one of those vigorous dreams which come like the simoon upon the brain of the sleeper who hath lain down to sleep among the forbidden sunbeams. Among the sunbeams, I say, which slide from off the solemn columns of the melancholy temples in the wilderness. The region of which I speak is a dreary region in Libya, by the borders of the river Zaire, and there is no quiet there, nor silence. The waters of the river have a saffron and sickly hue, and they flow not onwards to the sea, but palpitate forever and forever beneath the red eye of the sun, with a tumultuous and convulsive motion. For many miles on either side of the river's oozy bed is a pale desert of gigantic water lilies. They sigh one unto the other in that solitude, and stretch toward the heaven their long ghastly necks, and nod to and fro their everlasting heads. And there is an indistinct murmur which cometh out from among them like the rustling of subterranean water, and they sigh one unto the other. But there is a boundary to their realm, the boundary of the dark, horrible, lofty forest. There, like the waves about the Hebrides, the low underwood is agitated continually, but there is no wind throughout the heaven, and the tall primeval trees rock eternally hither and thither, with a crashing and mighty sound. And from their high summits, one by one, drop everlasting dews. And at the roots strange poisonous flowers lie, writhing in perturbed slumber. And overhead, with a rustling and loud noise, the gray clouds rush westwardly forever, until they roll, a cataract, over the fiery wall of the horizon. But there is no wind throughout the heaven, and by the shores of the river Zaire there is neither quiet nor silence. It was night, and the rain fell, and, falling, it was rain, but having fallen, it was blood. And I stood in the morass among the tall lilies, and the rain fell upon my head. And the lilies sighed one unto the other in the solemnity of their desolation. And, all at once, the moon arose through the thin ghastly mist, and was crimson in color. And mine eyes fell upon a huge grey rock which stood by the shore of the river, and was litten by the light of the moon. And the rock was grey and ghastly and tall. And the rock was grey. Upon its front were characters engraven into the stone. And I walked through the morass of water lilies until I came close unto the shore, that I might read the characters upon the stone. But I could not decipher the characters. And as I was going back into the morass, when the moon shone with a fuller red, and I turned and looked again upon the rock, and upon the characters, and the characters were desolation. And I looked upwards, and there stood a man upon the summit of the rock, and I hid myself among the water lilies that I might discover the actions of the man. And the man was tall and stately in form, and was wrapped up from his shoulders to his feet in the toga of old Rome. And the outlines of his figure were indistinct, but his features were the features of a deity, for the mantle of the night, and of the mist, and of the moon, and of the dew, had left uncovered the features of his face. And his brow was lofty with thought, and his eye wild with care. And in the few furrows upon his cheek, I read the fables of sorrow and weariness, and disgust with mankind, and a longing after solitude. And the moon shone upon his face, and upon the features of his face, and oh, they were more beautiful than the airy dreams which hovered about the souls of the daughters of Delos. And the man sat down upon the rock, and leaned his head upon his hand, and looked out upon the desolation. He looked down into the low, unquiet shrubbery, and up into the tall primeval trees, and up higher at the rustling heaven, and into the crimson moon. And I lay close within shelter of the lilies, and observed the actions of the man. And the man trembled in the solitude, but the night waned, and he sat upon the rock. And the man turned his attention from the heaven, and looked out upon the dreary river Zaire, and upon the yellow ghastly waters, and upon the pale legions of the water lilies. And the man listened to the sighs of the water lilies, and of the murmur that came up from among them. And I lay close within my covert, and observed the actions of the man. And the man trembled in the solitude, but the night waned, and he sat upon the rock. And then I went down into the recesses of the morass, and waded afar in among the wilderness of the lilies, and called unto the hippopotami which dwelt among the fens in the recesses of the morass. And the hippopotami heard my call, and came with the behemoth unto the foot of the rock, and roared loudly and fearfully beneath the moon. And I lay close within my covert, and observed the actions of the man. And the man trembled in the solitude, but the night waned, and he sat upon the rock. Then I cursed the elements with the curse of tumult, and a frightful tempest gathered in the heaven, where before there had been no wind. And the heaven became livid with the violence of the tempest, and the rain beat upon the head of the man, and the floods of the river came down, and the river was tormented into foam, and the water lilies shrieked within their beds, and the forest trembled before the wind, and the thunder rolled, and the lightning fell, and the rock rocked to its foundation. And I lay close within my covert, and observed the actions of the man. And the man trembled in the solitude, but the night waned, and he sat upon the rock. Then I grew angry and cursed with the curse of silence, the river, and the lilies, and the wind, and the forest, and the heaven, and the thunder, and the sighs of the water lilies. And they became accursed and were still. And the moon ceased to totter in its pathway up the heaven, and the thunder died away, and the lightning did not flash, and the clouds hung motionless, and the waters sunk to their level and remained, and the trees ceased to rock, and the water lilies sighed no more, and the murmur was heard no longer from among them, nor any shadow of sound throughout the vast, illimitable desert. And I looked upon the characters of the rock, and they were changed. And the characters were silence. And mine eyes fell upon the countenance of the man, and his countenance was wan with terror. And hurriedly he raised his head from his hand, and stood forth upon the rock, and listened. But there was no voice throughout the vast illimitable desert, and the characters upon the rock were silence. And the man shuddered, and turned his face away, and fled afar off, and I beheld him no more. Edgar Allan Poe was born in 1809 in Boston, Massachusetts. He had an incredibly sad life. His father abandoned the family when Edgar was just a baby, and his mother died soon after. Foster parents raised him, but eventually disowned him. He dropped out of the University of Virginia due to debt that was partially due to gambling. Although a huge amount of his work was published, he still lived in poverty. Poe married his 13-year-old cousin, Virginia. Ew. I'm not condoning it, I'm just telling you about it. When she was about 20 years old, she died of tuberculosis. In 1849, Poe himself died of, well, nobody seems to know what killed him. There are whole books about it. Pookas are magical shape-shifting creatures from Irish mythology. As is usual for monsters, in early stories they are malicious, but in later ones they are harmless or even friendly. Old tales of Pookas tell of them taking the form of dark horses and enticing humans to ride on their backs. The victims are never seen again. Newer stories feature Pookas that simply like to play pranks on people or even help them. The titular character in the classic film Harvey is a Pooka. He has taken the shape of an anthropomorphic rabbit, and only his human friend, Elwood, can see him. Here's another old public domain horror comic story I downloaded from comicbookplus.com. From The Beyond #1 by Ace Comics, here's The Phantom Puppet. Peter Lucas, the famous puppet master, could make his puppets do everything but breathe. In fact, his puppetry had reached such a pinnacle of art that only life itself remained unattainable. Or was it? Lucas got the answer to this question in blood-curdling accents. Nor was there any retreat from the horror his vanity had loose on London and on himself. And now, varlet, die as the dog you are. Donna Anna, I kiss your fair hand. The scoundrel who murdered your father is no more. This Lucas fellow is a genius. His puppets look so real. And thus ends another fascinating puppet show written, directed, and enacted by the one and only Peter Lucas. Come out, Mr. Lucas, take a bow. Pip, pip, hooray! Hooray for Peter Lucas! Wait a minute. Pip, pip, hooray? Isn't that supposed to be hip, hip, hooray? Yeah, whatever. Bravo! What is to be your next engagement, Mr. Lucas? My show for Scotland Yard, where I hope to spring a real surprise for our police force. Later, when Lucas reached his London flat, it was a wonderful show, Mr. Lucas. I saw it on my set. Thank you, Miss Brudge. I am not to be disturbed now by anyone. No one is to come upstairs. Tell your husband no drunken quarreling. I must concentrate. Who in blazes does he think he is? Ordering people around. He's off his crock, that's what. Going mad in that workshop of his. Living with his blasted puppets. Shh, Edgar. He'll hear you. And he has a frightful temper when he's mad. That's funny. I distinctly remember leaving the police benefit show puppet on the work table. Now it's gone. Here it is, on the chair. Who put it there? Mrs. Brudge must have been up to her prying again. Played with the puppet and was stupid enough to not put it back where she found it. Mrs. Brudge! Mrs. Brudge! What do you mean by monkeying around with my puppets? I told you 1,000,000 times nobody is to come up here. But I didn't go upstairs, Mr. Lucas. Don't you remember? You even changed the lock on your door. Nobody but you has the key. That's true. Yet somebody must have moved the puppet. Good heavens. Now he's on the work table again. Did I just imagine he was on the chair? What's wrong with me? It must be overwork. Nervousness. I see things that aren't there. I want this puppet to be my masterpiece. To be almost human. A diminutive mortal. In this puppet, I want to reincarnate the soul of England's most infamous murderer, Jack the Ripper. He must be so perfectly constructed that he'll almost have a soul of his own. He must shock those Scotland Yard boys at the benefits. Yow! My leg! The puppet. He stabbed me with his scissors. But how could he? Unless Yes, that's the only way. I must have touched some wires and brought about a mechanical reflex. I can swear there's a gleam of satisfaction in his glass eyes, a malevolence in his expression, as if he enjoyed stabbing me. Yes, this Jack the Ripper puppet will be my masterpiece. He will be as close to human as wood, paint, and wire can get. Tonight, benefit for retired patrolman of Scotland Yard, featuring the great Lucas and his puppets. Gentlemen of Scotland Yard, the main attraction of my show tonight is a character well known to you. The only criminal who ever eluded your iron clutch. That dastardly, maniacal killer. The one and only Jack the Ripper. Ha ha, he's cute. Let's see him in action. Marvelous. You asked for action and you're going to get it. I will show you tonight how Jack the Ripper accomplished some of his most heinous murders. And now, Jack the Ripper speaks for himself. Ah, a pretty unescorted maiden with a slender white throat. Prepare to die, my pretty, for you have come face to face with Jack the Ripper. The strong man cannot protect himself. All must perish, young and old. Nor can the spectacle of beauty stay my hand, the hand of a master criminal who loves only death. Enough, this is in bad taste. The man mocks us. Lucas must be mentally sick to put on a performance like this. The puppet is moving without the benefit of my wire pulling. Those are his words, not mine. He's gone berserk. On his own. Nobody can catch me. I'm too clever. Take him off. They don't understand I'm alive, eh, puppet maker? But we shall keep the pretense going. We shall pretend once more that you control me. He's talking to me. He's alive. Stop the show. Moments later, I beg your pardon for any offense I may have given. After a brief intermission, we will continue with the romance of Romeo and Juliet. That's much better. For a moment, Lucas, we thought you had lost your mind. 2 hours later, in Lucas's dressing room, it's a definite paranoid tendency. It comes over many artists. The desire to wield ruthless power. That's what may have motivated that performance. They think your mind snapped, Lucas. That you're carrying your control over puppets to insane lengths. But we know the truth, eh? An hour later, in Lucas's workshop, now I'm going to take you apart, piece by piece, and see where I made my mistake. I know I'm not crazy, and yet you seem to have a life of your own. Fool! You put the soul of Jack the Ripper into my wooden heart, and I shall not rest until I have killed in reality. Oh! You murdering little devil! You've stabbed me! For years you lorded it over us puppets, making us dance and sing, laugh and cry, as you pulled the wires. But now I'll pull a few tricks of my own. Come back, you little monster! From tonight forward, at the scene of every Jack the Ripper murder, another corpse will be found. Victims of the puppet you brought to life. Lucas ran from his room and... Mr. Lucas, we heard you screaming and running around upstairs. Is something wrong? Ow! Out of my way, you idiot. My puppet escaped. He's going to repeat all the Jack the Ripper murders. I've got to stop him. Is puppet escaped? I tell you he was off his crock. Jack, come back. Don't kill anybody. They'll only blame me. Jack! Yeah, I think that's the idea. They're going to blame you. Later that night, All we heard was a scream. Then we found him like this, his throat cut. I'm too late. Gives me the shivers, it does. It's like the first murder Jack the Ripper committed. Right here in the same doorway. Aye, Lucas, nothing can stop me now. Who'd believe that a puppet, a mere hunk of wood and wire, could kill? Ha ha! Read the papers. Follow my bloody career, for their blood is on your hands. No! No! Hours later, Lucas returned from a weary night's search. He's here again. Can it be a dream? Is Nocturnal coming and going? Got you baffled, eh? Good. Now you're under my control. Ha ha! I'm not like you, requiring sleep and rest. I can always watch you, but you can't watch me. Fall asleep, Lucas, and see what happens. Ha ha! I must be going mad. Things like this can't happen. But they did happen, or at least so it seemed to Lucas. I'm back from the hunt. Young girl this time. She screams so sweetly. What am I going to do? I'm powerless. Unknown murderer slays again. Peddler killed in saloon. Lord Fenwich murdered outside. This can't go on. I'll go to the police. Soon. But it's true. He's on the loose, I tell you. The puppet's responsible for all these killings. Take it easy, sir. Puppets aren't alive. They don't walk under their own power. Why don't you see a doctor for a nerve tonic? They won't believe me. They think I'm crazy. Yet the puppet must be destroyed. But how can I destroy him? Minutes later, as Lucas opened the door of his workshop, You! That knife! I've been waiting for you, Lucas. The point is poisoned. In 5 minutes you'll be dead. Your days of tyranny over puppets will be ended. I'll destroy you. I'll bolt all the doors. All the windows. You can't escape. I'll burn the house down and you with it. Kerosene will make this house blaze like a furnace in a minute. I'll destroy you forever. No, the fire's coming closer. Yay! Lucas, stop it! Did you hear all that screaming upstairs before we ran out, Edgar? It sounded like 2 people in Mr. Lucas's workshop. Maybe he did think he was 2 people at the same time. A crazy lunatic imagining all kinds of things. Who knows? Yes, who knows? Was all this horror merely in the twisted brain of the puppet master? It all seemed so real to Peter Lucas, but perhaps he was just a raving lunatic, projecting his own split personality to his puppet creation and imagining it lived. Perhaps Lucas himself was the fiendish murderer, roaming the London streets in search of victims. Aye, who can unravel the dark mysteries of this strange world? The end. Oh, by the way, mental illness doesn't actually work like that. Here's a Cyclops skull. This proves that Cyclopes actually existed. If I didn't fool you, you're smarter than the ancient Greeks. This is actually the skull of an elephant. A long time ago, Greeks dug up the skulls of relatives of modern elephants. Each of the skulls had a single big hole in the middle, so they figured they were from one-eyed giants. Stupid ancient Greeks. It turns out that making a public access TV show is actually a lot of hard work. So please help my lazy ass out by recording yourself reading a classic horror story or something. I'm also interested in talking to people who have really good Halloween costumes. Hey, Oscar the Grouch guy, I've seen you in Salem. Are you watching this? Go to altogetherooky.com to find out how to get in touch with me. We've arrived at the end of another episode, and I still haven't come up with a catchphrase, so I'm going to steal another one. Unpleasant dreams.